I call the member for Kiama.
Here.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I'd like to speak in support of the Rural Fires Amendment Vegetation Clearing Bill 2014. And can I start by acknowledging the Minister who is in the chamber, who's worked very hard on the bill, but it also gives me great pleasure to acknowledge the member for Ku-ring-gai, who is in the chamber, who I know stood in the Blue Mountains after that terrible inferno and announced what was very sensible policy, and I support it entirely. And the reason I support it, Mr Acting Speaker, is because I come from one of the most beautiful parts of this great state, where the beauty of that very location is one of its most inherent dangers, that being the ever-present threat of bushfire. And I acknowledge the interjection from the member for Campbelldown, that opal of the southwest. But I know that being a former emergency services officer, he's had to deal with many conundrums in his life, and I'm sure that he's aware of the importance of this issue to my electorate and other country electorates like mine. Like other members, can I also start my remarks by congratulating both the Rural Fire Service, the retained firefighters and New South Wales Fire and Rescue, who do an extraordinary job when they are called upon to protect life and limb. But, Mr Acting Speaker, for far too long, this state has had a system in place which has wound and bound property owners up in green and red tape. And I believe that this must come to an end, and this bill assists in that particular course of action. The provisions contained in this bill will allow landowners to carry out vegetation clearing works on their land without having to obtain any approvals, provided that certain requirements are met. Under the new arrangements, they will be able to clear any vegetation, including trees within 10 metres of their home, and any vegetation except for trees within 50 metres, provided they comply with the requirements of the 1050 Vegetation Clearing Code of Practice. Greater flexibility will also be provided to the issuing of a bushfire hazard reduction certificate. The Rural Fires Act 1997 legislation, prevention and mitigation measures in the event of a bushfire are important. Under the Act, private landowners can apply for a bushfire hazard reduction certificate to clear land for hazard reduction purposes. In response to recent fire events, it is proposed that amendments be made to the Rural Fires Act 1997 to allow certain landowners to undertake vegetation clearing work on land situated within what will be known as the 1050 Vegetation Clearing Entitlement Area. A hazard reduction certificate will not be required. The bill amends the Rural Fires Act 1997 to permit owners of land situated within a 1050 Vegetation Clearing Entitlement Area to carry out the following works despite any requirements for approval, consent or other authorisation. The removal, destruction by means other than by fire, or pruning of vegetation, including trees or parts of trees within 10 metres. The removal, destruction by means other than by fire, or pruning of any vegetation except for trees or parts of trees within 50 metres of the residential accommodation or a high-risk facility, in that section 100R subsection 1. Residential accommodation includes, but is not limited to, accommodation such as boarding houses, dwelling houses, hotels, motels, caravans installed in caravan parks, manufactured homes installed in manufactured home estates, and seniors housing. High-risk facilities are defined as schools, childcare centres and hospitals. 1050 vegetation clearing entitlement areas will be determined by the Commissioner of the New South Wales Rural Fire Service and identified on a map published on the New South Wales Rural Fire Service website. Landowners will be able to determine whether their property falls within a 1050 vegetation clearing entitlement area by accessing a portal on the New South Wales Rural Fire Service website. This portal, which is being developed by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, is a user-friendly web interface. Landowners will simply be required to enter their address or lot number into the portal to determine whether or not the 1050 vegetation clearing entitlement provisions will apply. Owners of land situated within a 1050 vegetation clearing entitlement area will be able to undertake vegetation clearing works under section 100R subsection 1, provided that they are undertaking these actions in accordance with the requirements of a 1050 Vegetation Clearing Code of Practice. This Code of Practice, which is being prepared by the New South Wales Rural Fire Service, will guide landowners in the clearing of vegetation and land situated within a 1050 Vegetation Clearing Entitlement Area. The Code of Practice will provide advice to landowners on the type of vegetation which can and cannot be cleared, including the types of trees, the circumstances in which vegetation should be pruned and not entirely removed, the protection of riparian buffer zones and the protection of Aboriginal and other cultural heritage. An ongoing public consultation mechanism will be built into the Code of Practice in the event that any substantial amendments are required. The bill also makes it clear that people cannot enter their neighbour's garden and cut down a tree just because it is within 50 metres of their home. Such vegetation clearing cannot be undertaken without first obtaining the owner's permission. A review mechanism has been built into the bill. Under section 100S, a review will be undertaken as soon as possible after the period of 2 years from the date of commencement of the new provisions. Including a new mechanism will ensure that the legislative amendments and any issues which may arise following their introduction can be examined and addressed to ensure the ongoing effectiveness of these new arrangements. Mr Acting Speaker, the Act, if passed, will commence on a day or days to be appointed by proclamation. The intention is to activate these arrangements prior to the bushfire season, which notionally starts in the October-November section of the year. At present, a bushfire hazard reduction certificate operates for a period of 12 months, or in some cases 3 years, commencing from the date on which the certificate has been endorsed. Under the proposed new Section 100 of the Rural Fires Amendment Vegetation Clearing Bill 2014, this time period has been removed. Section 100L will now provide that a bushfire hazard reduction certificate becomes effective on the date endorsed on it and operates for the period specified on it. This will provide for greater flexibility in terms of any works undertaken under a bushfire hazard reduction certificate. The bill also makes a number of amendments to the Rural Fires Act 1997. These are minor in nature and include amendments to the terms and membership of Bushfire Coordinating Committee and the note in Part 4 of the Rural Fires Act 1997 to clarify that part of that provides the vegetation clearing work to be done for the purposes of bushfire prevention. This bill also amends the National Parks and Wildlife Services Act 1974 to extend the exemptions contained in section 118A and 118D of that Act, provided that there has been compliance with the 1050 Vegetation Clearing Code of Practice. Mr Acting Speaker, I believe that the lives of individuals and the protection of their property must take precedence over trees and vegetation. I have seen in my own area of the Shoalhaven people lose their homes. I've seen rampant bushfires which, as a wall of fire, is almost unstoppable in spite of the best efforts of our emergency services personnel. And it is important that people can have the opportunity to do what is necessary to protect their homes. And whilst I support the provisions in this bill, there are many in my electorate, including myself, Mr Acting Speaker, that believe that the vegetation buffer zone could be much wider. In fact, I would advocate a much wider buffer zone to allow even more protection. But perhaps that might be something that can be considered when the bill is considered after its operation. But I have no doubt that this will go a long way to providing the safety and security that property owners require and allow them to take the actions that they need without the green tape that is often entangled in these sorts of circumstances. I'm proud to be part of a government that has increased hazard reduction right across this state. We are not intimidated by the Greens that have a different agenda in this place, one that seems to have very odd priorities when it comes to people and life versus limb, literally, from trees and from other flora and fauna. Whilst preserving our environment is vital, and whilst it is important that we do all that we can, it is important to have a balance. And I believe that this legislation is what property owners in my electorate are crying out for, because they want to know that they can have the protections that are required to take action that is required. But of course, in addition to these provisions, it's important that people have their own evacuation management strategy. Being able to protect your home is one thing, but also making a decision about when to leave in the event of bushfires and also taking other precautions that are necessary are vital to ensuring that you survive a bushfire in a regional or remote community. I know that this chamber has many people that are affected by bushfires. We heard before from the member for Hornsby, we've heard from the member for Northern Tablelands, we've even heard from the member for Baulkham Hills on the issues that every community around this state faces. But I think what the public are demanding are laws that reflect common sense standards that allow people to take the action that is necessary to protect their properties, to protect their families, and that is exactly what this legislation does. I look forward to seeing it in operation. I look forward to seeing what the opposition do in relation to this bill, and I look forward to seeing what the Greens do in relation to this bill. The Greens now have the opportunity to support a common sense piece of legislation which will go a long way to supporting the needs and requirements of property owners in my electorate. And I will continue to argue for sensible reforms like this that protect local communities, that give property owners back some rights and ensure that people can take the preventative actions that they need that are sensible, responsible and important for the protection of life and limb.